Our names are Mark Follow, Joseph Kircher, and Nyan-Dip Banerjee, and we developed the Startcraft bot. Startcraft was developed in 1998 as the best-selling real-time strategy game of all time. It is a warlike simulation where you need to gather resources, build a town and army, and combat with enemies. Our objective was to develop a Starcraft bot that could compete with the in-game AI and look like it is making intelligent decisions. To develop our bot, we will use the Broodwar API, WAPI, which allows us to talk to Starcraft using C++. We also built our bot off Startcraft, which is a bot with basic functionality developed by Dave Churchill. This project was a very fun and educational experience. Developing your own bot gives you a lot of insight into how difficult it can be to get a computer to complete an action that seems so trivial to a human. You have to break down things into smaller steps and think about what exactly you need to tell your bot to do. Along with this, you also need to develop efficient code, as you do not want your bot taking a long time to make decisions and slowing the game down. This forces you to use efficient algorithms as well as to develop very clean code. To complete this project, it involved a lot of organization and allocating different parts to the problem among the group to effectively develop the bot. Some of the areas we identified that we needed to work on were scouting, build orders, build and training managers, and combat. Joseph worked a lot on the scouting and build order of the game. His main focus was getting a probe to find the enemy base, detect what their strategy and build order was, and then respond accordingly. Mark's job was to work on the build manager. This involved ensuring that the units in the build order were being created, pylons were being built so there was always extra supply, and that units were placed in an efficient way. Nyan-Dip put his work into combat. This involved training an army, gathering the troops, defending our base, and destroying the enemy's base. The overall goal is to develop a bot that follows a strategy and responds intelligently when given new information. We need to build an army and base and destroy the enemy's army and base. This sounds a lot easier than it actually is, and it involves a lot of small parts working together. The strategy we were going to take with our bot was to detect the enemy's build order, respond by adjusting our own build order, and gain a strategic advantage. We want to be doing more acting than reacting in the mid to later game. Like I just said, a Starcraft bot is made of a lot of moving parts. When beginning to develop our bot, it was clear to us we need to break this problem into smaller subsections. We used technology such as GitHub issues and a planning board to break down a specific area we would need to focus on. Some of the areas we came up with were scouting, build orders, build, training and upgrading, information tracking, and combat. To implement a build order that would counter our enemies, we knew we would first have to scout their base. This is one of the first problems we tackled. First, we had to select a scout, then we needed to give them a list of locations to scout, and then lastly, get them to traverse the map until they detected the enemy. We then needed our scout to ensure he was detecting all the enemy units, and we also wanted to implement things such as harassing the enemy and fleeing to distract them from building their economy. Lastly, we needed to repeat the scouting process periodically to keep track of the enemy's positions and progress. Once we knew what our enemy's plan was, we could start our build order. This included having an initial build order to implement until we detected our enemy. And once we detected our enemy, we wanted to have the ability to change our build order. We also wanted the ability to upgrade our build orders as we progress through the game. And lastly, we wanted to assign a late game build order to really reinforce our base and army. Now that we have scouted our enemy and created our build order, we needed an actual way to build the units in the build order. We needed a build manager. The build manager would be responsible for getting the next element in the build order, checking if we had enough resources to build it, and then choosing a smart location and place the building. We also need to have the ability to train units, such as zealots and dragoons, and lastly, we need the ability to perform upgrades. Once we began the bot, we realized we needed a manager that the other managers could contact to get details about what is happening in the game. So we created an information manager. The information manager had many responsibilities, such as keeping track of the information we gained on our enemies, like their army size and position of bases. We also wanted to track our own info, such as our resources, army size, and buildings. And another big responsibility of information manager was to track what buildings and units were to be built and trained next. The information manager allowed other parts of the bot to work more efficiently. Another clear area that we need to focus on was our combat with the enemy. If we want to defeat our opponent, we have to consider things such as when to engage the enemy, which units to prioritize, where to group and regroup our troops, also most importantly when to attack our enemy. The combat manager was important to our victory. These were all the sub-problems we identified when initially creating our bot, and we knew that we would carefully need to implement every part, as our bot could not be successful if one area failed.
So next take. For the methodology, as Mark just mentioned, we have a couple of different sub-problems we want to solve, and for all of those sub-problems, we have a different manager. Our Startcraft bot knows all of those managers, and we also have a reference to the information manager from all of the other managers so that we don't have to actually pass the information to the functions you want to call. It's already available in all of the other managers. So for the information manager, we keep a lot of information about our enemy, like the enemy race, the enemy supply, enemy troops, and the enemy building, as well as the enemy base. For our own troops and our own game, we're gonna keep track of our troops, our building, and our workers, as well as the units you want to train, the buildings you want to build, and the upgrades you want to do, and our supply, our gas, our mineral, and our own bases. The only neutral information is the possible expansions on the map. We have add, delete, and get functions for all of those attributes, as well as update functions for gas, mineral, and supply. The most important functions are the onStart function, which is called in the beginning of the game, as well as the detect build order and response build order function. For the onStart function, we compute all possible bases. For that, we use Startcraft, and a base is determined by this kind of border in which we have all of the minerals and the gas that belongs to that base. If our base is our home base, so we have a starting location, that's our home base. If it's that, we add it to our own bases. Otherwise, it's going to be part of the possible expansions. For the detect build order, if our enemy is Terran and he has 2 barracks, we kind of expect an early start. If he has 2 or more factories, we expect a mech heavy build order. If he has a factory and a barracks, we kind of expect him to fast expand or fake a double factory. If our enemy is Zerg, we also take into account the supply he has. So if he has less than 12 supply in the spawning pool, it's probably a 9 pool. If he has less than 6 supply, it's probably a 5 pool. If he has any spawning pool and less than 12 supply, it's most likely going to be early hatchery. If the enemy has a Hydralisk, then we then also expect some early aggression and respond with a 10-12 gateway. If we haven't have any information, we kind of return a standard 9 pool build order for Zerg. For Protoss, we have a couple of more distinctions. We first of all check if he has 2 gateways. Then we check for the supply. If it's less than 9 supply, we expect a 9-9 gateway. Otherwise, it's most likely the 10-12 gateway build order. If he has a cybernetics core and less than 12 supply, that's gonna imply that he's most likely going for some fast cybernetic core units like early dragoons. If he has less than 18 supply and already a second nexus, he's fast expanding. And if he can't scout a nexus, but he only has 1 gateway and no cybernetics core, so he's not really relying on technological buildings. We expect him to expand later. If the enemy has more supply than 15, or we have more supply than 14, we turn Dark Templar. That's in case that we don't actually manage to see the enemy build order. The response build order is kind of orientated on what our enemy does. So in case our enemy has a 2-factory or fast expand or fake double build order, we are also fast expanding and building Dark Templars. If he has an aggressive bio build order, we are trying to counter that with early 1-gate core, which aim is to get Dragoons out early. If he has a 9-pool or 12 hatchery build order, we have build orders directly countering them. So we're just returning the build order our enemy has. If it's a 5-pool opening, we return the twin 12 gateway. If our detected build order is a fast core, slow core, a fast expand, or late expand, we are countering that with an aggressive 9-9 gateway. If it's a 9-9 gateway or 10-12 gateway build order from our enemy, we're mirroring that to counteract that aggression. If we suspect a Dark Templar build order from the enemy, we are also responding with a 2-gateway Dark Templar. If the build order is undefined and our supply is more than 16, we're going for a standard 10-12 gateway because we don't want to wait too long to detect the enemy build order and get behind. If we have no information about the enemy build order and our supply is more than 14, that's a similar scenario to the one above. We are going to Dark Templar fast expand, and if we have no clue about the enemy build order still, we're waiting for some more information. So things that we didn't manage to do, we couldn't save more information about the enemy worker count, as well as the dead troops from ourselves and the enemy. For the scout manager, we have a unit set with our scouts and a vector of possible scouting positions. The most important functions here is the scout function, which is called on every frame, as well as the add starting positions function, and also the harass and the flee function. For the add starting position function, as you can see here, all of the starting positions are circled in red. So if we haven't explored that starting position and it's closest to our base, push it in front, otherwise push it in the back. So we are always going to start at the closest possible starting position from our base. So for the add scouting area, we have the position we want to scout and the distance to that position we want to scout. We check for all of the corners. If the corners are valid tiles, we add it to our possible scouting positions. So for the scout function, for all of our scouts, if there's no building on the target position, meaning we can actually walk there, and we reached our target position, we erase that target position from our scouting vector. While we still have some positions left to scout, we command our scout to go to the next position. For the harass function, if we have no more positions left to be scouted and our scout is idle, we send him to the enemy base. And as soon as he's close to the enemy base, we let him search in a circle with a radius of 250 pixels for workers. If there are any workers present in that area, we let him attack the closest worker. For the flee function, if our scout is under attack, we let him move to our home base. We have seen a lot of games that actually the combination harass and flee function let our scout attack the closest worker, and as soon as he takes damage, he flees, and distracting a lot of the enemy workers into following him from the base, denying our enemy a lot of economy. Things that we didn't got to do, we didn't manage to get observers as scouts working, so they could help us detect cloaked units like Dark Templars or Spider Mines. They're themselves cloaked, so they wouldn't be detected easily. And we only handle one scout at a time, but if we would have had multiple observers, we would have needed to handle those too. So for the build order manager, we have build orders against Zerg, Terran, and Protoss, as well as initial build order and one for the late game. the most important functions here are the update build order. So we go to next build element, as well as the adapt build order, using the build order response from the information manager to change to a specific build order to fit our enemy. Here's first of all the late game build order is there to help us get all of the buildings we need towards the end of the game. So if our supply is more than 30 and less than 55, and we have already finished our build order, we want to change to that to get all of the buildings we need. The check build element looks if we have a supply greater or equal to the next supply required by the next element in the build order. And then we check if the element is upgrades, we add it to the upgrade queue. If it's a building, we add it to the building queue. And if it's a unit, we add it to the training queue. The adapt build order function is there to help us change to a build order countering our enemy. So if the enemy build order is not detected yet, we get the response from the information manager. If there's a response other than nothing, we change to that build order that we got the response. The things that we didn't get to do, we didn't have developed more situational build orders. Very aggressive early game build orders, like an early spawning pool, are hard to detect because we have some delay until we find the enemy and get the scouting information. And also we didn't actually change our army composition according to the build order. So we have kind of really standard army composition for most of the.
Here we have Combat Manager. We have several attributes and several functions that help us not only get hold positions for our army, but also help get commands out to attack and set different rally points, along with perform different rushes. Let's go through each of these functions a bit more closely. Get initial hold position. This one gives us the closest expansion position from the start location. We get it by going through all the expansions and then finding the expansion with the minimum distance from the start location. And then we again go through all the expansions, and if the expansion matches the minimum distance, we return that expansion position. Then we look for get closest enemy expansion. It returns the closest expansion to the enemy base. We do the same thing, but this time we check for the minimum distance from the known enemy base. Here we have get closest enemy building. For this one, we can look through all the enemy buildings that we get from information manager and our scout, and we check if it's null, or if the unit that we got, if the unit's distance from the enemy building that we're going through is less than the unit's distance from the closest enemy building, and we check if the enemy building is visible. And if it matches, then we decide that enemy building is the closest enemy building and we return that. For closest enemy, we do the same thing, but this time we go through enemy troops and we return the enemy. For get unit type from troops, we go through all the troops. If the troop type is the given unit type, we return that. We put it into unit sets and return the unit set basically to get all the troops of that unit type. Then we have all attack this position. This one basically makes all the troops attack a given position. So we check if the position is valid, then for all troops attack that position and make that position attack position. All attack this target. If your target is not null, then for all troops attack target. Set target for unit type. We take in the unit type and the target. Sets target for specific unit type to attack. We go through all the troops and we see if the given type matches the troop type, and then we make that troop attack the target. Set target type for unit type. We pretty much the same thing for all troops. We go through all the troops and we check if the type is the same as the given type, and if that's the given type of troop, then we go through all the enemy troops and we see if it's the given type of troop from the enemy, and then we make that troop attack that enemy troop. Then we have all move, which moves all troops to the given position. We have set rally point, which sets the rally point where the troops are supposed to hold position. We have hold position, which sends troops to the given position and commands them to hold it. In here, basically, if we check if the position is valid, Then we go through all the troops, and if the troop reaches the given position and can hold that position, then we ask the troop to hold position, else we check if the last command's target position is the given position. Otherwise, we move the troop to that position. And we add a spacing of 10 to our x-axis of the position to do some spacing for the hold. And for hold position, we have another type. It works the same way as the hold position, but also checks the type of troop before asking them to hold position. We have regroup function, which helps a lot because it actually helps us to get our troops back to our hold position. Or does every troop to move to the rally point and wait 720 frames before cancelling the order. If regroup not ordered and we have troops, we set the regroup position to a rally point and we move all our troops to the regroup position. We store all these troops into a regrouping unit set. We set the regroup frame to the current frame so that if the regroup is ordered, we can check how long it has been since the regroup was ordered, and if it has been more than 720 frames after it was ordered, then we set the regroup order to false. This is mainly to not wait for the troops that get stuck in the map. And then we return regroup completely true. For all regrouping units, we check if the unit has not arrived within the regroup distance of 250, and then we set regroup complete to false. Otherwise, if the unit is idle and if it's not within the regroup distance of 250, we move the unit to that regroup position. If the regroup is complete, then we set the regroup order to false. We clear the regrouping unit set, and then we return regroup complete. Set attack position. It sets the attack position for the troops. Execute attack. It makes all the troops attack their closest enemies. We go through all the troops. We set the search for the closest enemy of that troop's position, and then if the closest enemy is not null and is visible, if troop is not under attack or is idle, then we attack the closest. Then we make the troop attack the closest enemy. Execute attack with unit type. It basically makes all the troops of the given type to attack the closest enemies or attack the attack position if it's valid. So we almost do the same thing for all troops. We get the closest enemy. If the closest enemy is not null and is visible, and if the troop is not under attack or is idle, we make the troop attack the closest enemy. Otherwise, if the troop is idle and attack position is valid, we make the troop attack the attack position, which helps a lot in pushes and ambushes. Attack enemy buildings. We attack the closest buildings when the troops are not in combat or when there are no troops nearby. We go through all the troops. If the troops are not under attack and is not attacking, and the closest building to the troop is at a distance of 20, then we attack that building. Attack enemy workers. Since Dark Templars attack enemies who are gathering minerals or gas or constructing buildings, and if they are when finished with workers, look for buildings and other enemies. It also sends dragoons and zealots to kill any close enemies to Templars. For this, we go through all the troops and we check if that is a Dark Templar. If the troops distance to enemy base is less than 100, then for all troops, if the troop is gathering minerals or gas or constructing and is visible, we attack the enemy. We make the Dark Templar attack the enemy if the closest enemy building exists. Otherwise, if we are done with all the troops or the workers, basically, we then look for the closest enemy buildings, and if that exists, we make them attack the enemy buildings. Otherwise, we use the execute attack with unit type to make them attack the closest units near them. And then we set target for unit type zealots to go to the nearest enemy to fight the closest enemy to our Templars, and same with the dragons. Otherwise, if it has not reached the distance to less than 100, then we make the troop move to the closest enemy expansion. We have set worker attack. It takes a boolean, and if true, it gets the worker to attack the closest enemy. As you can see, and then we have detection. It checks for detected units. If race is Protoss, indicate unit type from troops. We get observers. If their size is greater than 0, then we return troop. Our combat strategy basically is like this. On start, we check for the initial hold position, nearest expansion. We then start training guards, zealots, dragoons, templars, and it happens as soon as we have supplies. Once we have 5 or more zealots, we check if the enemy troops who can attack are close to the base, around 120 units or not. If they're then, we set the attack position to that unit and send all troops there. We're calling execute attack each frame to make sure if the enemy is close to our troops, they attack them first. Once we get dragoons, we then send them to the hold position to look for aerial units. Whenever an enemy unit appears, we check for the following. If it's flying and it's closer than 120 units in distance, we send a dragoon to deal with it. If it's moving and it's closer than 80 units in distance, we send all our troops to attack that unit position along with any close units. If it's just as close as 70 units, we'll send all our troops to attack that unit position along with any close units. We also send our workers to attack. We also check that if our worker has gone farther than 150 units in distance from base, and if it's not under attack, we send it back to the start location to mine minerals to make sure our workers don't follow the enemy to their base. When a unit gets hidden, we check if there are any enemies within a radius of 120 of all our troops. If there are none, we check if any of our buildings are under attack. If they are under attack, then we set that building's position as our attack position. Else we regroup to the initial hold position. What this helps in doing is basically, if the troop detects a certain enemy, then it holds that position there, while the other troops that don't, they go back to their regroup position. And if that troop gets attacked or it detects enemy, then all those troops come back and ambush that enemy. Then we have, if there are enemies within that 120 units radius, then we issue execute attack with unit type for all our troops. Our main idea here is to let the scout bring the enemy units to us and we ambush them for our hold position. And since we keep looking for close enemies, we oftentimes follow their unit who's trying to run back. And since they did not get enough time to build the economy, we managed to destroy them very fast, but that is an ideal scenario. Our main goal is to wait for the Dark Templars. We have attacked enemy workers running on each frame, which commands the Templars to go to the expansion closest to the enemy base to stop their expansion. Once they're within 100 units of distance from the enemy base, they first check if there are visible enemies who are gathering minerals, gas, or constructing, and attacks them. Otherwise, it checks if the closest enemy building exists and attacks them. Else, it starts attacking nearby troops. We send our dragons and zealots to kill the enemy close to these Templars to protect them. Things that we didn't got to do. We did not get to create a better strategy to build an aerial counter to handle late game aerial rushes, due to us only depending on dragoons for stopping aerial troops. So once we get rushed by our only aerial fleets or troops, and if we fail to create more dragoons, we lose to the enemy gradually, even though we manage to handle their ground units. And being able to morph Dark Templars into stronger units to get stronger rushes.
The build manager has a simple structure. It checks the building, training, and upgrading queues and performs the required actions on the units. Here we see a flowchart of how a unit goes from the build order to completion. It starts in the build order where it is passed into the building queue. The build manager then retrieves the unit from the building queue, and if it can successfully build the building, it passes it to the construction queue. The process is very similar for training and upgrading units. The first major function in the build manager is check building queue. This function retrieves the building queue, and if the building queue is empty or we already are on the way to build another building, we return. If we successfully retrieve a unit from the queue, we check if we have enough of the required supply, mineral, and gas. If we meet all requirements, we pass the unit to the build building function. The build building function is where we actually gives the command to build the unit. First, we get the types of unit required to build a desired building. If we successfully retrieve a builder, we then search for a location to build. We use map tools to search the radius around our base so we can place the building and still have a building tile all around. This stops workers and troops from getting stuck between the buildings. Once we have our position, we make the command to the builder to build that required unit in the given position. The last important function in the build manager is the get builder function. This function is called by the build building method, where we iterate through all our units and find the one that is not currently scouting. If we find a unit of the required type, we return it. The functions for training and upgrading are very similar to the functions we just walked through for building.
To highlight the aspect of the game that we decided to specialize in planning our bot, we also wanted to think about what we could make special about our bot and different from others. We decided that we wanted to make our bot responsive to our enemy. The goal was not only to focus on our build order and strategy, but also keep an eye on the enemy's race and plan. We wanted to take advantage of our scouts, and depending on what our enemy is building, We want to detect it and respond accordingly. We managed to successfully implement this in our bot. Broodwar API and how complicated it can become very fast. We figured out we have lots of way to go. From playing hundreds of games with random enemies, we figured that our chances of winning is not that high, mainly because we don't prepare fully for late game aerial warfare. Against Zergs, we had a win-lose ratio of 0.59 with 37 wins out of 100 games. Against Protoss, we had a win-lose ratio of 0.35 with 26 wins out of 100 games. Against Tyrian, we have a win-lose ratio of 0.07 with 7 wins out of 100 games. And we had to do a lot of games for this. For the Zergs, this is like a really good scenario. Same with Protoss. With Tyrian, we just got massacred. With their aerial rush, we couldn't defend it and we were destroyed. Our ground units couldn't handle that. Strong points about our bot. Strong points about the bot was that it managed to defend its space against several rushes against Zergs and Protoss by distracting their workers and by attacking their buildings to slow their build order. Even in late game, it manages to defend its base and hold position for quite long until we eventually get overwhelmed by aerial warfare. It manages to drag the time for quite long, and with better strategy there are ways to make a comeback from those late game scenarios. Weak points. The bot fails to stop the terrain rushes sometimes in early game due to slower build order compared to them, and also their troops manage to overwhelm us with lots of aerial units. Other than that, our bot also fails to penetrate terrain bases that effectively. Our bot fails to counter heavy aerial units, and our bot does not place buildings accurately enough to position photon at the opening of the base to help attack troops from rushing. How to fix these issues? We are hoping to create a better building function to help with the placement of buildings, better along with a better strategy to make aerial fleets a part of our game. Once we have the lasers around the base, and once we managed to create a fleet of heavy aerial troops waiting at the hold position, waiting for ground enemy units to attack, we could not only defend our base better, but also attack and destroy bases more effectively. Because it would usually be hard to stop a huge aerial rush. Also, we need to improve our hold position strategy and send different specialized troops to different locations to hold. Conclusion. We tried to make a bot which would detect enemy build order and adjust our build orders based on that. That was our specialization. We think we managed to successfully implement it. We wanted to defend our base from rushes, but also bring enemy troops to us for ambush in an effort to slow them down. And we succeed in doing that. And finally, once we get the Templars, the Dark Templars, we would slowly push in into their base to kill their workers and buildings, which also works. So technically, we succeeded in doing what we wanted to do. But is it the best way to do it? We believe we have lots to improve. If we had more time, we would focus on developing a better strategy to understand threat level based on enemy troops and send specialized troops to deal with those threat levels. We would also put more effort into morphing our units, along with a better pathfinding for our scout to distract the enemies throughout the map and not just bring them to us.